systematize digital transformation. That was my quest. And my quest started in the year 1992. I had just come back from the US after a year back to Chennai, and I had to write a memo. Those days there was no email. So I wrote a long memo, drafts of which I have put here. In that, I advocate the formation of an innovative and creative analyst group, which I call the INCA group. And that everyone has creative talent and we must tap into that. Of course, I couldn't figure out how to get this initiative approved and see it through. I did speak to the top leaders, but I couldn't quite figure out how. Over the years, I started learning and teaching innovation methods to my teammates and mentees, but producing systematically breakthrough was not happening at all. Even though I had a few breakthrough innovations to my credit, I couldn't really figure out a way to do this systematically. By a lucky accident, I became the head of innovation at Cognizant in the year 2009. By then I had realized that maybe continuous innovation is a better path for all employees to follow. So we launched the managed innovation program based on that principle. And by the time I left in 2014, we had delivered $1 billion of continuous innovation to our customers. Kumar Sachi, my former colleague in the innovation group, wrote a long article describing all our methods in a comprehensive fashion for the McKinsey HBR competition, where we reached the global top 10 in the world of innovation. I have provided the tiny URL link. Please go ahead and read that. It's an excellent. As I said in a couple of episodes ago, we in Tiny Magic had to pivot ourselves to digital transformation 2 to 2.5 years ago. We realized that meant that all of these skills that I describe in this chart have to be available in a single program. New kinds of breakthrough innovation techniques, execution techniques, transformation skills, mindset change, agile, lean startup, and so on. So this was the thing that we were working on. So I went back to my favorite leader, Steve Jobs, and could be the favorite of any of you to see if I can pick up. By some lucky accident, I landed on a 1989 interview of Steve Jobs, in which he outlines why we cannot ask what customers want directly and give it to them. He goes on to say, because there are many things in tech that are ahead of the customers, and customers may think that is impossible because they are not aware. So he says that great products are created at the intersection of the technology point of view and the customer point of view. Now, of course, that didn't make it clear as to how exactly Apple was doing it, but that set me on a path of how does Apple really do it. Now again, I recall the 2005 Stanford speech that he did. Now unless you were inside a cave, you would have all listened to the speech. I have listened to the speech myself many times because it's one of the most inspiring speeches by a business leader. In that, he outlines a principle that could be called connecting the dots principle. I have now extracted just the key parts of that speech, about 2 minutes and 20 seconds, with my own annotations for us to use in this discussion. Let's watch that.
This story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of Reed College after the first 6 months, but then stayed around as a drop-in for another 18 months or so before I really quit. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them. If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards.
Hopefully that made it clear about what the connecting the dots principle was. Now, just after Steve Jobs passed away, in the Atlantic, there was a long article about how the iPod was created. So I read that and I think it kind of fits the pattern. So Toshiba's 0.25-inch disk drive had just been released. And we all knew the cumbersome method by which we had to collect all the cassettes, CDs and use them to listen to music. In that article, they say the story of the iPod. When the first prototype of the iPod was made, the engineers take it to Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs looks at it and says, this is just too big. The engineers say it's impossible to make it any smaller. And he, in characteristic fashion, picks up the prototype and drops it into the fish tank in his office. Apparently air bubbles came out and he says, look, air bubbles are there, that means space is there, crunch it down. So obviously they went back to the drawing board and crunched it down to the size that we later saw, and the rest is history. So this kind of setting this not small enough fitting into the pocket as an extreme objective in our method. Now if you look at the iPhone, the iPad, the Apple Watch, not just that, any transformative innovation in any industry, my favorite example of the ATM that I've talked about, they are all following this pattern. So this connecting the dots principle seems to be very, very important, and it's a key principle in our method as well. What we have done, me and Kumaran, is taken this principle, added our own bits, and we created this high-power digital transformation framework, which we have now taught to many hundreds of people, and they are able to produce breakthrough innovations consistently. Over the years, I am grateful to the authors of all these books that I have consulted, which have influenced my thinking to be able to come up with these things. I am very, very grateful to them. I am celebrating the 50th episode of this series, and we want to run a program, our Hypohot Digital Transformation 120-day, 10 minutes a day program for some of you. If you want to participate in the program, I would like you to team up with a few people in your organization and apply individually at the URL that I have given. That URL will lead you to a page where you have to download our native app and then answer some questions that I have given. Based on the answers you have given, you will get selected. And once you are in, you will mentor you through this 120-day program where you will be able to create a digital transformation for your organization. I look forward to seeing many of you in the program. Thank you all for listening to my